So what I'm going to give you here is kind of the main sections of a paper. You do not have to follow this, but you're going to probably want these pieces in there at some point. It may not look exactly like this. It may not be like, I wouldn't necessarily expect a section called, data analysis or anything like that. That being said, you will have to do data analysis. So it's just a matter of how you structure. I'm giving you an example that may be useful to you. It may not fit what you're trying to do very well, so you'll have to sort of move things around a little bit. That's fine. I will not say, do you have a section on this? I will just want to know that you've done that thing. All right, enough about that. All the page numbers I have in here are just recommendations, not required. It's just to give you an idea about sort of the balance of the paper. Like how much should I, if it's say a 15 or 20 page paper, how much of it should be the literature review? How much of it should be the introduction? I've had people who've done 6-page papers who've done a 3-page introduction. Like at some point, you stopped introducing and now you're moving on. So the balance has to be right as well. So I'm just giving you some suggestions on this. Again, do what you got to do with it. The introduction is really the first thing, and it's usually 1 to 2 pages. And all an introduction is, nothing else, but an introduction is telling the reader what you will tell the reader. That's it. It's pretty simple. Introductions tend to trip people up a little bit, or they think of it almost like warm up. Like I'm going to write a couple pages and then I'll get into the heart of the paper, and it really comes off pretty poorly. So there's some things to look for here, some technical things to watch out for. These, I always look for these in every paper. If you get these things right, you're golden. If you get these things wrong from the jump, you're not going to do well in this paper. And I'll just explain here. This is your first impression. So I'll just give you the hints of all professors, all people who read things like this, and your boss someday. If your first page it has a lot of mistakes, is poorly written, I'm done. I mean, I know you could have the best paper. It could be the most, fluent thing that it just has the best ideas. But man, you throw a couple like really stupid mistakes on the front, and all of a sudden I think, you just don't care about this paper, so why should I? And you're already moving down. Just having a good introduction gets the reader on your side. A bad introduction, or an introduction that shows you don't care about it, the reader is no longer on your side, no matter how good your ideas are. So take time with that introduction. This first impression is really important. I know it sounds stupid in a paper that you're researching and you're writing, but that is really important. This paper is not murder mystery. It's not clickbait. I shouldn't be like the thing where you say, I'm going to explain how to end the war in Algeria. Stay tuned. On the last page, it'll be there. I don't want that. There should be no surprises. I should know exactly what you're going to argue, and the paper should be about you arguing it, but I shouldn't be surprised to know that at some point poverty is going to be a big part of this, or whatever. I should know this up front. So it's not a murder, no surprises. Let me know in the introduction what's going on. All right? Don't start with a meaningless throwaway line. Again, this is one of those really easy things. Some people just start with that line, since the beginning of time, people have fought wars. Oh my gosh. I will see that. One of you will write something like that, and I will be so sad. I mean, don't just waste my time. I got other things to do. I don't need to read your beginning of time references. So, that there are other ways to start your paper, and it doesn't have to be starting huge and then narrowing down from there. Figure something else out, all right? Okay, so that's the first section. The next section would be your literature review. And it's going to be about the same size. Now, again, if you were in a grad school, you might have a much longer lit review. I don't really expect that for a class like this where we're writing it in a semester. You're just not going to have that much literature, so you're not going to have that much to review. But you will have some. And really all lit review is what other people have said about your topic and where your argument fits in with what others have done. That's it. That's what a lit review is. I should be able to read that lit review and say, okay, I see where your ideas fit in with what this group has said or what this group has said. Or you're kind of arguing against this perspective over here, or you're arguing in support of this perspective over here. It shouldn't just be you in isolation. I just came up with this brilliant idea and no one else has ever thought of it before. That may be, but I really doubt it. I really don't think that you're going to be that unique. And so find out where you exist in this whole thing. Remember that your topic is your dependent variable. Your topic is not the conflict itself. Algeria is not your conflict. Is not your topic. Your topic is reduction of violence in Algeria, or increasing the likelihood that the government is stable in Algeria. That is your topic. So that's going to be really important, all right? I don't need the history of Algeria. I only need the stuff that's relevant to your topic. Okay, I don't know why I'm picking Algeria here. Deal with it. Okay, next section is what we call theory, and that's usually 2 or 3 pages. You notice it's a little bit longer because this is kind of where the you comes into this. The reason that you are bringing something different to the table that I can't just go out and read on the internet. This is you. You're going to briefly describe your dependent variable, and then you're going to explain why the independent variables that you are suggesting affect the DV, why they do that. So what this is going to do is you wrote these paragraphs, remember earlier before you started, about the theory, why the independent variable affects the dependent variable, why the cause leads to the effect. Again, with the idea in mind that if I want to change that effect, if I want to change my topic, I want something different there, I want more peace, or I want less violence, or whatever that is, that I need to know what's causing it so I can change those causes. And this is the theory. This is where you explain this to me, that if you can show that, then when you show that one thing is related to the other thing, then I'll know, yeah, you're onto something there. I want more peace, and therefore I think that you have demonstrated as well. So you're going to list every step between the independent variable and the dependent variable. Poverty leads to grievances, leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, which leads to an increase in violence. So if we get rid of poverty or reduce poverty, we will reduce violence, because you see how the two things are connected. You're also going to want to show the relevant assumptions. Sometimes there's almost always assumptions in everything that you're talking about. And so what are the assumptions that you have that your theory makes? You can't prove that they're true, but they're pretty reasonable explanations about what's going on. All right. So far, so good. I know this is feeling a little overwhelming because you don't have your topic in front of you right now. I almost want you to go to this video and the next video after you start working on your topic. That first video is the important one. I know I'm doing a digression here. You may have to come back to this at some point. Don't worry. This will make more sense as you start getting going. But right now, you don't have these pieces in front of you. Right now, it's like you're building a house and you're standing in the lot, and you don't have any tools, you don't have any materials, you don't know anything about even what the house is going to look like. So when I'm saying, here's how you build electrical system in your house, you're going, what? What are you talking about? But as you start to get those pieces together, the electrical system will start to make sense. All right. Operationalization of variables and data sources. Again, this is a bigger chunk because, again, you're going to try, if you're showing that this is related to this, how are you going to do that? So you're going to describe the dependent variable. You already know this. You've written this down a long time ago. You're going to list the constructs that you use to measure this thing, and you're going to explain why these constructs are useful measures for the dependent variable. Why this measurable thing, it's not exactly democracy, but it's a good way of looking at it. Poverty is another one of those things. Poverty is a very vague term, theoretically. So how are you going to measure that? Maybe you're going to measure the low GDP in a country, or maybe you're going to measure low GDP in a particular region, or maybe you're going to measure this, or maybe you're going to measure that. How are you going to, there's a lot of ways you can get at poverty. How are you going to do it in this paper, and why is that a good way to do it? Then you can do the same thing with the independent variables. Exact same thing we just did there. And one of the things you're going to want to do then is explain where this data is coming. How are you going to get this data? I mean, are you going to gather it? Is it already in a data set somewhere that you're going to use? And why is this good data? Like, if you're using, say, poverty measures, okay, where's this measures coming from? Is it coming from a research institute? Is it coming from the government? Is it coming from somebody who's living in their parents' basement guessing? Like, tell me why the data is good. All right. Again, this section feels a little, I don't know what the word is. It's a very important section. Let me just say that. It's a very important section because this is going to be how you show, if democracy leads to this, how am I going to measure democracy? Why, as the reader, how do I know that that's going to be a good way to sort of measure what you're trying to get at? All right. The next section is data analysis. You'll notice this is the longest section, and there's a good reason for that, because this is where you actually show, I gathered the data. Okay, you don't show me gathering the data. I assume you're out there gathering the data. And then you use this data and you looked at those, your theory, your independent variables, all that, your hypotheses, and you said, all right, I think my hypotheses, they hold up or they don't hold up. This is you explaining that to us. So show your work clearly and thoroughly. Tables, graphs, charts, etc. can help present those findings. You're going to point out potential reliability problems. I'll give you a good example. I had a student last year who was working on a paper about the trafficking organizations, the militant trafficking organizations in Colombia. Well, we immediately had a problem, and that was she wanted to talk about the decrease in the amount of cocaine being trafficked out of Colombia. Great. Here was the problem, though. There isn't measures on that. Like, we can talk about legitimate trade. There's somebody out there writing all that down. Illegal trade, there is no sort of source that says, all right, we shipped, the gangs don't say, we shipped out 22 tons of cocaine this year. It's just, there's no way to sort of validate that. There's some reliability issues that we had to work around to try and get an explanation about what was going on, to measure that particular thing. And the measure we had was okay, but we recognized that it was not a very accurate or reliable measure of cocaine. It was just sort of a approximation. And we recognized that and said you have to sort of take it with a grain of salt then as a result of that. For case studies, so some of you will do case studies instead of like sort of numbers. In fact, a lot of you do case studies. And case studies, this section may be a little bit longer. And what you're doing in a case study is you're not doing a history of the conflict in Algeria, for example. You are comparing the variables in these situations. That you are just basically taking your hypotheses and your constructs and your theory, and you're doing it in the English language, I guess you could say. You're doing it in a narrative form. You're telling that story, but the only parts of the story you're telling, again, history is it gathers a whole bunch of causes and effects and puts them all together. It often presents more of an environment or a context than it does demonstrate that this caused this. Social science is much more interested in this caused this and less interested in the overall context. While all those things are neat, not all of them are relevant to the thing you're particularly studying. So what you have to do is pull out those things that are relevant, and that's what the theory and hypothesis help you do, and the data analysis is where you show us that. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a comparison of those variables, that here's the variable in this area, and here's the variable, and how those worked. All right. Implications of your findings on the validity of your hypotheses. In other words, okay, you did all that work. Were you right or were you wrong? And it's okay to be wrong, to be honest with you. Most people think if I have a hypothesis, it has to be correct or my paper's stupid. That's not true at all. Demonstrating that a hypothesis is not, that people think could be true is not true, is just as good as showing that a hypothesis is true. So at least we're not making, you may not be able to tell us what policy is best, but you can tell us policies to avoid at the very least. All right. And then how you might turn around and refine your hypothesis or theory as a result. Like I wasn't right. Here's where I might tweak that and say, well, what about this instead? Okay. Last thing, conclusion. Well, not the last thing, almost the last thing. The way you're going to start your conclusion is going to be to restate, but not to quote, your argument in a couple sentences. Just sort of say it again, get it fresh in my mind again, or the reader's mind again. And you're going to highlight the important implications of your argument. Okay, so here's the argument. Here's where we got with this whole thing. Here was the findings of this paper. And based on these findings, let's put this to use. Are there some policy prescriptions? Like, what should we be doing right now in order to improve the peace or decrease the violence or whatever? What policy prescriptions would you recommend then? Again, based on that, based on the stuff you just did. And it will often follow from your hypotheses, to be honest with you. If your hypothesis is correct, the policy prescription is pretty easy to follow from there. What predictions do you have or other applications? In other words, if this is true, then if poverty continues to increase in this area, we expect to find more violence, and so more needs to be done. And always give some possible further research projects. You are probably not like, you've written your conflict map, we've solved the problem, let's move on. It probably will tell you, well, how do we refine this a little bit? And what should, you don't have to necessarily do it. I'm just saying, what should you study next in order to develop sort of these policies even further? And now this is the last part, and that's bibliography and appendices. The stuff at the end, so everything from bibliography and any appendices that you might put in, all of these things are to help in what we call replication. And that essentially means, and so remember, this is social science. So think about a scientist, right? A scientist comes in and says, look, I did this and this and this, and I cloned a baby goat. What science is really important in science is that somebody should be able to come along after, do all the same things that you did, and also replicate a baby goat. And that's the same thing here, is that once you're done with your paper and you have your presentation, you have your analysis, you have all your outcomes, all that kind of stuff, somebody should be able to come along without you sitting there in the room with them, pick up your paper, and have enough information from your paper to go do the same thing you did, the same study you did, and come up with pretty similar conclusions. Like if you're going to gather this stuff, they should be able to go out and find the same stuff from the same. That's why you need these sources in there, so that the person can come along and say, this is where you got that information, let me check that out. Yes, that's exactly what that says. I came up with the same answer you did. Good science. Always include all the sources used in the bibliography. We have gotten in this habit, I don't know where this came in, but a works cited page, and I'm okay with that. A works cited page works for some things. But for things like this, research papers, you need a bibliography. You need to know the things that are influencing the things that you are working on. Even if you don't quote them, even if you don't have them as a footnote, it still needs to be added because it sort of helped you refine your ideas, at least in your head, if not on paper. Okay, that's the end of this. I know this is a long thing, and probably going to have you guys watch these over time as opposed to just right now. But, and you also have that outline, but I think this is really important to go over these things. Okay, I don't know.